Welcome. I'll call the meeting to order, and let's begin, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, because I wouldn't know if I was patriotic.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Bloom Shapiro going to present? Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is Vanessa Rizito. I serve the town as the engagement partner, and Jessica Anaskoff is with me. She serves as the engagement manager. So I know you have received the CAFR, federal single audit, state single audit, required auditors communication, and also the management letter. But I've prepared just like a summary that I'm going to go through tonight. So obviously, if you have detailed questions about any of those documents, either interrupt me during the summary, or we could go through them at the end too, whatever is your preference. Okay, great. So as far as the agenda, I'm just going to go over what the engagement scope was and the various standards that we follow for the various deliverables. I'm going to summarize the required auditor's communication. I'm going to give a treetop level highlight of some of the financial results of the CAFR. Jessica is going to go over the federal and state single audit and also the management letter comments, and then she's going to turn it back over to me, and I'll just let you know about some upcoming GASB standards. Okay? So as far as the CAFR, we issue various opinions in the CAFR. It's not like a typical company, if you will. We actually issue various opinions on the columns, if you will. So we've issued an opinion on the governmental activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information. We do our audit under auditing standards generally accepted in the USA, and also government auditing standards. As far as the federal single audit, we follow uniform guidance, and then the state single audit, we follow general statute sections listed there. As far as the required auditor's communication, all of the significant accounting policies that the town follows is in Note 1 to the financial statements. So all of the major elements of the financial statements, the accounting policies are listed there. We actually had 3 new standards adopted this year. GASB 75, which was accounting and financial reporting for OPEB. So I'm going to go into more detail later, but this was the standard where the calculation was done differently, more on a long-term liability basis as opposed to the old funding basis. So we took the old liability off of your financial statements and recorded the new liability. Again, I'll go into more detail later. We adopted GASB Statement 81. The name of that standard is Irrevocable Split Interest Agreements. This actually applied to some monies that the Board of Ed received, the McLean Scholarship, and I'll go into that into more detail too. So this affected the fund balance of the Board of Ed Programs Fund. And then lastly, GASB 85, which is entitled Omnibus 2017. It's basically a clarification standard, change some terminology, but not a big change in the financial statements. There's various accounting estimates in your financial statements. We're required to call them out to you. So the net pension liability and the net OPEB liability in your financial statements, you utilize an actuary to estimate that for you based upon assumptions that management has signed off on, if you will. The medical IBNR, which is claims incurred but not reported, that is calculated by a third party. And then management calculates depreciation for your fixed assets based upon the useful lives of the capital assets.
Questions at the end, or we can It's up to her.
Yeah, that's fine, if you have a question.
Just
Yeah.
quick about GASB 77 on abatements. Are we doing that? I know we don't have a current abatement right now, but I know there's a reporting requirement now.
That's right, so if you have a tax abatement, we're required to disclose it in the financial statements. So in the future, if you do have them, we're required to.
Okay, great.
On to page 5 of the presentation, we did not encounter any difficulties during the audit. We did not have any disagreements with management. Management did not consult with another accounting firm for a second opinion. There were no uncorrected misstatements. And then we also require management to sign a representation letter. It's like an 8-page letter that encompasses the financial audit, federal single audit, and state single audit, basically saying that they've given us everything we asked for, they answered everything honestly. So we have management of both the town and the Board of Ed sign that letter. Just to delineate the responsibilities of the audit, management is responsible for the financial statements. Basically, the only thing that we're responsible for is our audit opinion. So management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements in accordance with US GAAP, and also for the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control so that the financial statements are free from material misstatement, whether due to error or fraud. We are responsible for expressing opinions on those financial statements and also for planning and performing our audit to provide reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. So the term reasonable assurance means that we are not looking at every transaction that the town has done during the year. It's based upon materiality, it's based upon this. So we've issued on all those opinion units clean opinions, unmodified opinions. And just to talk about the various parts of the CAFR, for those of you who are new to it, the introductory section of the CAFR has principal officials, a transmittal letter, an organization chart, and then the financial section has first our independent auditor's report, the management's discussion and analysis, which is written by management. It's a good document to read along with looking at the financial statements because it kind of provides a narrative as to what happened in the town during the year. The basic financial statements follow the MD&A. The notes to the financial statements has a lot of great information in them about all the elements of the financial statements. After the notes is a section called Required Supplementary Information. We call it RSI. So that's where you'll find the general fund budgetary presentation, the sewer budgetary presentation, information about pension and OPEB, kind of historical information. Combining fund statements and schedules follow the RSI, so all the detail funds are after that. And then lastly, the statistical section, which is pretty interesting. It's 10 years of information about the revenue of the town, the debt of the town, and also some demographic information. Okay, so as far as governmental activities, so these are all the government funds of the town aggregated together and on a full accrual basis of accounting, including your capital assets and debt. So net position of these activities increased $3.3 million from 107.5 to 110.8. And that is basically because capital assets increased about $3 million and then debt decreased approximately $6 million as a result of payments of bonds and loans, and also an actually decrease in your OPEB liability.
That would imply a $9 million increase.
So those are the bigger things that contributed to it, not all of them. Right. General fund on page 9, your total fund balance is $16.8 million, which is an increase of $2.6 million from the prior year. I've also included page numbers here if you want to look later. Unassigned fund balance is $14.38 million, which is 13.55% of general fund expenditures. Budgetary revenues came in $334,000 less than budget. and budgetary expenditures came in 2.49 million less than budget. Tax collections for the current grand list year were 99.4%. And then as far as the other governmental funds, the other funds other than the general fund, the sewer use fund, Board of Ed programs fund, capital projects fund, and then all the other smaller funds of the town. The total fund balance of all of those funds is a little over $10 million, and it decreased about $5.85 million during the year. And that, I think the biggest reason for that is because there was a decrease in the capital projects fund because long-term financing is not in place yet for the capital projects. Your two internal service funds, PPO, HDHP, and HMO fund net position decreased $851,000 to a negative $122,605.
Isn't this the one we just put like $1 million in last year?
It wasn't last year, it was this fiscal year, so you'll see it during this fiscal year.
Oh, okay, so it just did.
It's been corrected.
Thank you. It's like, wait a minute, didn't we already fix this?
Yes.
Yeah, this was 6 months ago, but this is so,
Right.
Yeah. And then the dental fund net position increased $68,000 to $378,940. Fiduciary funds, your pension trust fund net position increased $3.4 million to a little over $64 million. And then the OPEB trust fund net position increased $1.2 million to $15.414 million. You're holding funds, agency funds. These are funds that are really not the town's money, but you're holding them as an agent, as a fiduciary. Those have assets of $1.18. And then I talked earlier about the two GASB statements. So GASB statement 75, net position was restated negative $11.97 million to, as I said before, to record the liability at the new calculation for GASB 75 and take off the liability for GASB 45, which was the old OPEB standard. And then net position was restated in the Board of Ed Activities Fund for negative $380,000 because of the McLean investment. So what happened with the McLean investment, when that was received back, I don't know how many years ago, it was brought into cash and also brought into revenue. So this money is not under the custody of the town or the Board of Ed. It's like an endowment. So while the town has irrevocable rights to this money, it's really not in their custody. So what we did is we took the $380,000 out of fund balance, if you will, because it went into revenue, and we put it in deferred inflows of resources, which is like a liability on the balance sheet. And then I know you're interested in the pension liability. So your net pension liability is $16.7 million. Your pension plan is 79.32% funded. And then your net OPEB liability is $5.96 million, and that is 72.11% funded. So those represent your total liability for pension and OPEB, less the amount that you have in your pension trust fund and OPEB trust fund at June 30th, 2018. So the funding percentage could change based upon the market value of the assets on June 30th, because it is, you know, a kind of a real-time measurement for the assets.
Funding balance would change if we changed the assumption. We're thinking about lowering the assumption, right?
What, I'm sorry.
If we change, right now the investment assumption is 7%. We are talking about changing it down to 6.5, so that
Okay,
would change
yes.
the funding level quite a
So
bit.
that's going to change the liability,
Right.
the total liability, right?
You don't know that off the top of your head.
I don't,
Okay.
no, that's not my not my area. I'm sure the actuary would know that.
And do you have a number, because it used to be in the CAFR, I didn't see it.
Okay.
I might have missed it. How many years left we have before we're fully funded?
I don't think
Given
that's in the
current-
CAFR. That is
It used to
probably,
be, yeah. But
it
that's-
might be in the actuarial report. I'm not sure.
It is, it's an actuary report.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. It seems like it's been 20 years and it's never changed for as long as I've
Okay.
been on the board. Like, when do we get to 19?
And then in addition to your own liabilities, we're also required to disclose the liability of Simsbury teachers that the state of Connecticut is responsible for. So we've always disclosed the pension piece, so that is $111.435 million. This year, there was new disclosure over the OPEB piece, so that is $28.682 million. So this is, these are the amounts when the state of Connecticut talks about gifting a third of the liabilities to the municipalities. These are the amounts that they're talking about.
Yeah, that's because theirs is not 79% or 72% funded.
So this is the end of my presentation on the CAFR. Does anybody have any questions before I turn it over to Jess and she goes over the single audits?
Go ahead.
Can you show me where in the report we account for senior tax abatements, veterans, and ambulance and fire abatements that we give?
So you receive monies for, like, grants for those, for,
We receive state money, and then we also grant exemptions for certain fire personnel,
okay.
based on their years of service, or if they're currently involved with Simsbury Fire.
So, I mean, the tax collector's report is in here, but it's not really shown. It's kind of inherent in the assessment.
So would that change with GASB 77 or no?
No, so GASB 77, and I'm not going to remember all the pieces of it. I don't know if you want to try to help me, but it's, GASB 77 is an abatement to spur economic development. It really
That's what I
doesn't
thought.
include firefighter abatements or elderly abatements. It's more like a elderly housing type of thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was my question.
Okay. Anything else?
I have a tiny comment, not a question, but
Okay.
it's not necessarily, I'm not sure who's the right one, but I make this comment every year, and it never quite gets fixed. On page Roman numeral, small Roman numeral 6, the listing of financial policies that we have. It's missing the non-lapsing account for the Board of Ed and the spend to save account that's never been funded for the Board of Selectmen. But we actually do have policies on both of those things. It's not a big thing, just a little nit.
So Amy gets a pass because she wasn't here last year.
Right, exactly.
But don't,
But I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that
Yeah.
we have those policies.
yes.
Great, so I'm gonna go over the federal and state single audit. Those are the nice little thin ones that you have in front of you. So first, the federal single audit. So your total grants that you received was about 1.8 million this year. And of those grants, we tested the special education cluster, which was about $1 million. And on that program, we had no findings over compliance. And as Vanessa had said earlier, we had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies over the financial statements. So there's actually two letters with the single audit, one that talks specifically about the compliance for the grants we tested, and the other that talks about the controls over the financial statements. And we had no findings and no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Similarly, on the state side, you received about 9.5 million. Of that, about 6.7 million was exempt from testing, and that left about 2.8 million that we would look at when we decide which programs to test. So this year we tested Open Choice Early Beginnings, and County of Road. And of those programs, similar to the federal side, there was no findings on the items that we tested for those programs, and Similar to the federal, there was no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies noted over controls. That was the easy ones. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is the management letter. So in front of you, they have the management letter. It's the one that starts with current recommendations. So we had a couple new recommendations this year and then some updates on what was outstanding from prior years. So the current year recommendations, the first one is year-end cutoff. So when we were testing the capital project funds, we noted some transactions that crossed years. This sometimes happens on a construction project that the invoice is received much later. So we do some testing and we found a couple invoices that were immaterial that were included in the wrong period. So they were put into 19, they probably should have been.
Do we have the letter? Which letter are we talking about?
It should, like the third,
Yeah, okay.
current recommendations.
Oh, current recommendations, okay. Thank you.
And then the second recommendation this year, the state is, there's a new person in the position, I hope is saying it nicely, who's really comparing what is reported on 141s to what is reported in the single audits. You're not alone in this. We have several clients that have gotten communications from the states that their 141s are not matching what's on the single audit. So outside of the Board of Ed, ED 141s, we're recommending that any ED 141s that are done go through the finance department so they can be compared to the GL, so that what goes on the single audit reports is what is being reported there, and then you don't get these annoying emails from the, I shouldn't say that, emails from the state asking for $100 differences.
And so the ED 141 is a report that it's mainly a Board of Education report that the Board of Education inputs the grant expenditures for various grants. So it's just their terminology.
And then some comments that are outstanding from the prior year with the statuses. The first one was the pension and OPEB trust funds. We've always received the information for these, but we've made entries to put them into your financials. And so this year, with Amy coming on board, the pension OPEB trust funds are now in your system or reconciled in your system. So it's not that we never received the information. Our recommendation was that your general ledger stay up to date with the information. And now, if you go to the next page, there's a 2018 update, which this is now happening, since Amy is looking at these. Another recommendation that we've had in the past is capital asset reporting. And I know there's been a history on this one through several different finance directors. The capital assets are still on Excel spreadsheets. I think they might have been trying to put in a system at one point, but they're still on the Excel spreadsheets. And so just some best practice recommendations. Assets that are purchased with grant funds should be identified. There is a year, I think it was 2016 maybe, that the accumulated depreciation never got updated on the spreadsheet. And that's still the case. Amy had to work with spreadsheets that other people have been working on, so has to be updated, but she's aware of that, and hopefully going forward that's corrected. And then construction in progress should have a schedule so that you know what the projects are, and then where they are in their timeline, life. Yeah.
So we are looking at software to do this, right?
Also, in the past, we've made this recommendation on internal controls, and I know it's a small office, so there's only a couple people in there, and that's where some of these are coming from. The finance specialist has the ability to set up vendors, print checks, and mail checks. That should really, as a best practice, be with more than one person.
You just have to clone her.
The other thing, capital assets, insurance allocations, debt schedules, they're all prepared by Amy. So in a perfect world, somebody else would be preparing those, and then Amy would be reviewing them before they're submitted to us. You can see the 2018 update. You guys are probably aware of this. You're looking to add a person, a budgeted position in that office to kind of help with that segregation of duties. We also, I'm sorry, I skipped over a couple. We also noted a few areas bank recs were not reviewed timely by the finance director. I think this was a product of not having a finance director for part of the year, and then, you know, just having to come in and do the items that had to be done, and bank recs were done, they weren't necessarily reviewed timely, now they are and caught up. And then journal entries in the past that were made by the finance director or assistant were not being reviewed, that has been changed, and now there's a review process in place for those. We also recommend pretty much to every town a fraud risk assessment, and obviously with all the articles you can read in the newspaper constantly about fraud, it's good to stay on top of it and stay ahead of any potential threats that you may have. So again, that's something that town is looking into. I think the next one is the Accounting Procedures Manual. This is a document that would kind of dictate all the procedures that are done in both the Board of Ed and the town's finance department. I know it would have been very beneficial with Amy coming on that this was there, that she could have looked at how things were done. It's a best practice, and that's why we recommended that it be done. It is in process. I know Deb in our discussions has several spreadsheets on her computer or your shared drive of different processes. It should just be more in a formal document. I know the same thing upstairs with Kira. She's got lots of policies kind of here and there on how they do things, but it really should be one document that's all together. And finally, positive pay. This has been here for a very long time. Again, a best practice would be that you would send a file to the bank with the check numbers and the amounts, and then when somebody goes to cash one, they can correlate it to what you've sent. I think the town has been working with Simsbury Bank on this. There's a software, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a software issue with what the bank has versus the system you use to make this happen, that you're still trying to come up with a way to make that work.
So it's probably not gonna happen until you get a new financial
Accounting
system.
Yeah, if we decided to stay with our current accounting system, they're actually going through an upgrade if we go through with it in the spring, and we'll try to retest. But from what I've gathered, a lot of the issue has been with our lack of support from Superior. So typically, your accounting software would work directly with the bank, and they'd go back and forth and figure out who needs what and how the file should look, and then they do the test uploads. But we can't seem to get that support from Superior to work with the bank, and it's just dead as standstill.
Is it unique to Simsbury that we can't communicate, our systems can't communicate, or are there other banks where our systems would align more easily?
I've never seen it where a place hasn't had positive pay. That's like, I mean, that's up there in, you know, quality of internal controls. But our issue isn't Simsbury Bank. I mean, they're more than willing to work. It's Superior.
Yeah, I got you.
And all of their mergers and their takeovers and the, you know, their systems support has changed. And there's been some frustration there. So actually, January 22nd, we're doing our demos for a new accounting system.
Oh,
and this will be on top of the list.
Awesome.
And one other thing that's not on the management letter that we just wanted to mention, we did do, we do an unpredictable procedure every year, and this year we decided to do some testing over the Department of Social Services. And we did find some items where support wasn't included for an invoice and checks were being written by the director for petty cash. We didn't put these in the letter because Amy wasn't here for the period that we did the testing. Since she's been here, that's been changed. There has to be support for all invoices that she approves now, and checks are being written to petty cash to resolve that. So although we looked at transactions before June 30th, we also looked at some after that to see that Amy has changed that policy. So it's not in the letter, but just a added item that we found. Any questions on any of those?
That last thing about petty cash was where at
Department of Social Services.
Social Services.
And what was the magnitude of the discrepancy?
There wasn't a discrepancy.
Okay.
It was just that in order to get petty cash, the director was writing a check out
I
to
understood.
herself to
Yep.
cash and then bring the cash back in and use the petty cash.
Gotcha.
Now it's being written out to petty cash, so it's kind of a change in process, and it actually protects your
Yep.
Department of Social Services
Yeah,
director
that's-
as well.
Thank you.
Okay, and lastly, GASB standards, exciting. All right, so 2019, there's 2 standards. I don't think that either of these are going to affect you. Statement 83 is certain asset retirement obligations. So if you had a large asset, this is most common if you're disposing of a power plant or something where there's some kind of remediation that needs to happen. You would have to account for all of those remediation costs as soon as you make the decision to dispose of that asset. Statement 88 is certain disclosures related to debt, including direct borrowings and direct placements. So if you don't go out to the public market and you directly place some debt with one buyer, you would have to disclose that. And also, if you know, any loans, like bank loans, would have to be disclosed. There really wasn't a standard for that before, so that's in the standard now. In 2020, there's a new definition of fiduciary activities. This will affect the town. So at the very least, your agency funds are going to be called custodial funds, and we're going to have to relook at all of those to make sure they're in the right bucket funds type. In 2021, the GASB is following suit from the FASB, so there's a new lease standard. So if you have any operating leases that all you're doing, it's just an expense right now, that arrangement is going to have to be brought onto the balance sheet. So you're going to have an asset and a liability. And then lastly, statement 89, accounting for interest costs before the end of a construction period simply means that you cannot capitalize interest on debt used in construction anymore. And I don't think a lot of municipalities are doing that anyway, so you can early adopt that if you want. Be a hero.
Yeah, Lisa.
So I don't know if this is really to you or whether it goes to our accountant. I know in terms of the funding level for the pension and OPEB, there are some assumptions baked in there, and there are salary increases of 325 to 650. Those days are long gone. Okay. So if those are no longer the correct assumptions, would our funding ratio go up? Because they've been more in the 225 range.
I mean, that's a question for your actuary.
So you use the actuaries?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if we could get that question posed to our actuary to see if we're using correct salary assumptions.
Offset the change in
Down
discount.
to 6.5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That would be
that's what
nice.
I was thinking.
All right.
All right.
Questions, comments?
If
Thank
you have
you.
any other questions when you're reading it, please reach out.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Good reading for the plane to Egypt.
I already read it. I'm taking novels.
All right, thank you. All right, next up is the proposed police new uniform transfer request. Who's presenting that?
Start, jump in. So I guess this has been a project that's been going on for quite some time. The police department wanted to get new uniforms as detailed in the memo that Chief Walter wrote. That's included in your packet. Since it wasn't included in the current year budget, they wanted to cover it using their asset forfeiture account, which is in their fund for their narcotics task force. That fund has a cash balance of about $36,000, and they want to use $13,500 of it to transfer into the general fund to help offset the cost of the new uniforms.
So just help me understand what this fund was and what it was originally intended for.
So, Chief Walter can definitely help me out with that. So I think that there is a grant that goes into here for some of their narcotics and drug activity
Yeah, so-
programs.
So originally, I believe it was an asset forfeiture.
For that
This
one.
one
It's because it's recorded now.
Yeah.
Can I stand?
They can sit.
Thank
You can stand.
Thank you. I think originally it was an asset forfeiture seizure from around 2008 or 2009 where the town took possession of a house that was used for narcotics. And there was roughly 99 or $100,000 that was taken from that. The state or the feds got some of the money and the town got a majority of that. And so it lays out what those funds can be used for. They can be used for equipment, for training, for all sorts of things. And it's been slowly used over the years. There may have been some grants have been put back in there. For instance, we have a bulletproof vest grant. So when we either issue for the first time a bulletproof vest or we have to replace a bulletproof vest every 5 years, we spend that money out of that account, or we have anyways the last 6 or so years. We spend the money out of that account, and then the feds reimburse us for roughly 50% of that. So that fund sort of makes up what that is.
And how big is this fund in total? Today?
$36,375.
Okay. And it is specifically for use in the police department, or is it?
Yes, it's a
It
police
is,
department
okay.
special revenue fund. But the grant money that he's talking about with the bulletproof vest, that's not part of this $13,500. This is strictly the forfeiture of the assets that came in from that seizure in the major bust.
Okay.
So is it only that one seizure? There aren't other opportunities to?
So we haven't had
Haven't
many.
busted anything?
No, so on occasion, like 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 have come in over the last few years from some narcotics related, but that was really the large one for us.
I remember it.
Yeah. And none of that money in there is part of that bulletproof vest grant. That comes as a replenishment once the money.
But that went into and out of this same fund that we're talking about.
Correct. Yeah, I think that was the avenue for it.
And again, I should know this, but I'm going to ask anyway. So the fund, the Board of Finance has control to make this decision, but the recommendations are made by the police department? Okay. All right. And do you want to show us the uniforms?
Sure, yeah. So what I can tell you first about the uniforms is we've had the uniform that we wear today for probably 25 years. It's a nice uniform, it's a unique uniform. It's what we would sort of consider a Class A uniform. So over the last maybe 3 to 5 years, there's been a big push from the officers to get to a more practical uniform, a uniform that has more pockets, a uniform that does not split when they bend up and down, that they're not worried, to get down on the ground and to get dirty with. And then we've also had some difficulty with the availability of that. We are one of only a few towns in Connecticut that wear that gray. And the cost has gone up with that gray. The availability now is roughly 3 months before somebody can get a gray shirt. These uniforms here are a very quick turnover. Within 48 hours, we can get a new shirt for somebody. We had several companies come in and give us a bunch of options, and then these two officers volunteered to do wear tests for the last several months. And a group of officers decided, which ones were the best, both in how they looked and the functionality of it. This happens to be a blower uniform. The pants have pockets, which you really can't see. We weren't interested in that sort of BDU look that puffs out. It's called a hidden pocket.
Cargo pockets.
And so, so when the officers need to carry items or locate items and they need to quickly secure that, they have a place to do that. Our current pant does not have that. They're also much more flexible. There's a lot more mobility. Both the shirt and the pant have a wicking property to them, so any type of fluid, whether it's water or coffee, bodily fluids, whatever it is, has a better property, or better wicking property, so it will not soak in. Even in the snow or the rain, our current uniform smells a bit like a wet dog or a sheep when it gets wet. This will not do that because of the blend here. The shirt also has some built-in mesh from the armpit down. So there's a lot more breathability with that, and in the summertime, as Linda was saying earlier, in the heat it's very difficult, especially wearing that bulletproof vest underneath. So that vent down through the side is going to be really beneficial for us. And there's a few other things. There are hidden pockets in the shirt even that are in the side behind the two breast pockets there. There's a zipper, so that shirt can go on and off a lot easier. And another big benefit to this uniform is it's completely wash and wear, where our other uniform was dry clean only pant, and a, depending on where you bought the shirt, could have been a dry clean only shirt. These colors will not fade like the others did. If you lined up a bunch of officers today, you would see from a nice gray to kind of a purplish, pinkish hue, depending on how they've been washed and cared for and how long they've been in service. So a lot of benefits to changing over to this uniform here.
Great.
Just a quick question, is there normally a line item in your budget for uniforms?
The line item in the budget is for a brand new officer.
Brand
So
new
when
officer.
when we hire a new officer, we will provide them with a full uniform, and then also a line item for replacements. So if any of these, either of these officers out on the street today, they tear it, they get involved in something, it rips, it needs replacement, then we will replace it. Otherwise, they do have a uniform allowance that they get annually to replace uniforms on their own.
So is it standard practice then for one-off situations that you'd use a special account, or would it just go into the budget as a line item?
I mean, it could go into the budget as a line item if we didn't have the special revenue fund. That would be appropriate to wait until the next budget cycle. But since we have this money, I was talking to one of the lieutenants today, and this money is given to us by the federal government, and there's nothing saying that they can't take back what we haven't spent. So it's advisable to spend it, and this is one of the uses that's permitted under the guidelines, so it makes sense to use it.
But said another way, if you had decided to make this effective July 1st, 2019, it would have been a line item in the Board of Selectmen's
Correct.
budget?
Yes.
Okay.
This just allows them to move forward before the next budget cycle.
All right. That's the right question. Okay. Yep.
Who pays for the dry cleaning of them currently?
The town does.
So
So
what is the
basically-
savings we're gonna get on that in the transfer?
There we go.
Can you monetize that?
Yeah, right now, no, because it's a contractual obligation that they get a certain amount. We are looking at different options as far as maybe having our own cleaning service and the possibility of that. What makes it difficult is that there are 3 shifts. So if we had, say we had a dry cleaning service come in, or a cleaning service come in and pick up like a lot of businesses do, we have different shifts and there are different needs, but we are looking at what the possibility of reducing that overall dry cleaning or cleaning expenditure is, but it's contractual right now.
So were you planning on using this fund when we did the last budget to do this purchase? Because the reason why I'm asking is generally I don't like to use special revenue funds for operating costs. Those should be for one-time expenditures. Is generally how we've done things. So I just want to sort of understand, and by the way, that you look great. So let me start with that. And I understand the need for it and it all makes sense. I'm just sitting in the chair of a Board of Finance member. I'm just trying to understand why this wasn't brought up during the budgeting process and sort of anticipated through that process. I'm not saying that I'm going to vote against it, but I just want to understand the process.
So maybe to get a mental image, we've had uniforms that we've been sort of looking at intermittently now for the past 3 or 4 years, sitting in the closets of the lieutenants. So it's nothing that really we were planning on doing this time around. We saw the opportunity. We keep getting information from the manufacturers or the vendors that it's really limiting, the availability. And so I think what really kicked this into motion probably around June was when New England Uniform said it's going to take 3 months for Gary Gray to get a shirt. At that time, it was in May, we had supervisor exams going on. Officers are out getting new uniforms so they can look nice for the process, and they're having difficulty getting those uniforms. And then so they're actually resorting to a different vendor and paying a whole lot more money. So a $90 pair of pants, which is what we can get our current pant for, you can purchase here locally for $130 and be able to get it in time. So it was not in the works as this is what I planned on doing during this fiscal year. It was an opportunity that came along, and there were several things that sort of...
And because of a need that arose.
Yes, yeah.
And so when you say contractual, is that union contract or with the dry cleaning company?
Union
Okay.
with IBPO.
And then, what in terms of this account, when you go through the budget process, Maria, do you sort of start out the budget, you're okay, we're gonna use this account for this, and therefore we don't have to put in the operating budget? How does that factor in the coordination with the budget process?
Sure. So this is actually something I'm really glad we're bringing this to you, because these types of purchases out of the special revenue funds were happening on a pretty regular basis. But again, from an accounting perspective, we wanted to clean that up and tighten things up. So purchases like this were ordinarily just happening. But again, we felt that this is more of an operating budget expense, and that the right thing to do was to bring it to you and transfer those funds out of the special revenue fund and put it into the operating budget so we can make the purchase out of the operating budget. This is a little different than a normal, uniform replacement, because we are going to be changing over the uniform for the entire workforce. So we've got like this one-time split.
Right.
And to Amy's point, I felt and strongly supported this and thought that the use of the special revenue fund, as opposed to using taxpayer dollars for this one-time purchase to get the startup uniforms, was a good use of those funds that were available.
I move that we move forward and do it. I mean, this is a lot of discussion for $13,000. That perfectly
Well,
makes
no,
sense.
yeah, you're right.
I just want to ask before we do that.
Sure.
Is there anything in the near future that maybe the existing dollars in the fund, are you expecting to possibly spend out of that fund as well?
Not in the near future. There's nothing sort of in track right now.
Yeah. So the 36 will go down to 20.
It does.
If there's something
23.
that comes up, I would say use it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been sitting there for 11 years now, it's 10.
And the information
So,
that
let's
the
use it.
state or the federal government can take it at any
Yeah.
point has come along several different times. And
Yeah.
in the past, there's been reservations on spending
Next
that.
time the choice presents itself, choose it.
So I'll make a motion to,
I just did. You
Okay.
can second
Second.
mine.
All right, so the motion is the one that's in the prep, which is to, effective January 15th, transfer $13,500 from the asset forfeiture fund to the general fund for the purchase of new police uniforms.
Yep.
Made by Linda, seconded by Kevin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
may I ask the chief a question?
The what?
May I ask you a question? Sure. So this is not relating to the uniforms, it just more has to do with the upcoming budget and staffing for additional officers. I just was curious, I don't know if this is the appropriate time. Just
Probably not, but go ahead.
No,
Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just curious as to what the upcoming staffing levels were going to put in, given the recent increase in the number of units going up. I don't know where the town of Selectmen are in the process, but it's kind of off the cusp. You don't have to answer it then.
Well, it's definitely a very big concern. And as presented in years past, our ratio is very low compared to other places. That's not the driving factor for the number of officers that we have, but it is a factor. And so I have to continue my discussions with Maria just to make sure that we kind of get a holistic picture of what the needs are. But I think our numbers are a little low.
Nice. It was kind of off the cuff. Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's just you don't know where he is in discussions with Maria.
No, I know. That's what
She may be shooting darts at
Thanks,
us.
Thank you, guys. So I will agree with that, Linda, as a general rule, we shouldn't spend 15 minutes on $13,000. But I did think that the aspect of this that we did spend most of the time on, which is where did the fund come from and whether this should be done on a routine basis, is something we should be careful about because, as you said, especially if it's been happening without our awareness or otherwise, not big dollars, but process is process, right? Okay, great. Moving on. Approval of minutes from the December 3rd meeting. Anybody have anything substantive we needed to change?
Move adoption.
Second, I can't second.
Second.
All in favor?
I have just one question.
All right.
Sorry.
Oh,
That's all right.
actually,
Yeah,
you're
when
right.
we-
I forgot I put notes on here.
When we had talked at the last meeting, we talked about requests to Maria that I thought we should capture in terms of the abatement and what we wanted to see. And I just thought that those should be encapsulated in the minutes
Yeah,
because
I agree.
although we didn't take a vote on it, it seemed like there was some consensus there.
So you want to give Karen the detail then, or
Yeah.
what we actually, and I believe that those recommendations made it back to the Board of Selectmen, right?
Did you take them back to the Board of Selectmen?
They were approved, it
one
was
of them
approved.
was adopted.
And-
It
and
was,
Bob-
some
yeah.
of it, yeah.
Correct, and Bob and I are working on the draft agreement right now.
Yeah.
But also in terms of, you know, the financial impact analysis and fiscal analysis is a
All those
form a part
things,
of
yeah.
it. I don't know if those need to be in the minutes, but I just want to make sure that we do follow up on those, because those, I think are important to Ray, and also how we're going to report them. I know some cities and towns put them right on the website, they're very accessible. I think we want to make sure if we're going to, if this is just a one-off, I'm not so worried, but if you're going down a road, if the Board of Selectmen's going down a road, we're going to start to grant them. It's very important that we be transparent. The state has been hit on their lack of transparency and their lack of metrics in evaluating their effectiveness. So you know, if you haven't picked up on it, I'm very cautious about using abatements, and I hope that isn't something we're going to do aggressively.
All right.
Do we need them in the minutes, or you feel like you have?
Yeah, and I mean, the board members were also there that evening for that discussion, but,
Could you give us an update at some point in a few months when you have the fiscal impact analysis, what metrics and how you're going to be transparent about them at some point?
sure.
It can be a year.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, go too far afoul for something that's not on the agenda just for FOIA purposes, but the abatement is under the purview of the Board of Selectmen, and the policy that they have is definitely something that I have suggested to them, that I think it's something that needs to be looked at. We've done some housekeeping just for formal government changes to that particular policy that was last year up to 2015. I think that there are a number of items in that policy that need to be further reviewed and updated. So I do expect that's either something probably that the EDC or the Business Development Incentive Committee will be working on some recommendations for updates to the policy.
great.
So I think that most likely any changes to process or expectations or requirements would come within that policy. Just for example, something I implemented was written staff reports, which previously hadn't existed. So that at an administrative level, I think there were certain things that we were able to do, but certain things will also require policy change.
And then that isn't within our purview, please report it in the budget books. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So are you gonna amend the minutes or not?
So I know if you feel like do you want them amended, Linda?
I can live without it.
Okay.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded and we all voted for it. Correct.
Aye.
Did you know?
All in favor of adopting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Good, thank you. Finance Director's report.
So we have just an updated listing of grants and donations from the last time I reported out to you. There was a couple donations that came in for some social services assistance for their food-based programs. Under the Uniform Chart of Accounts, this is something that the state developed along with Bloom Shapiro. I believe it's been at least 5 years ago now, and the first implementation was done in fiscal year 14. Bloom Shapiro did that upload for us, and then since then there's been no uploads meeting the requirements of this reporting. So Vanessa brought it to my attention. We also received a letter from the state letting us know that we weren't in compliance. So in order to be compliant, it is a question that is asked during the audit now that they report it to the state. So we got on top of that and we uploaded everything from fiscal year 2015 all the way through the current fiscal year 18, and now we are in compliance. We'll be issuing under investment request for proposal, we'll be issuing an RFP for investment services. Morgan Stanley is no longer in the business of assisting governmental clients with either government securities purchases or CDs, and they have given us till the end of March to pull our money out. And then the tax abatement, I won't go through this in detail, but at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, it was approved with a cap of $540,000, and I attached the approved abatement schedule on the back side of the page.
What was the dollar amount of the fees waived?
A little under 17,000.
Yes.
All right, and then the budget status report?
So, just a quick overview on this for the general fund. I just noted that the tax revenue collections were about 55% of budget. I previously reported the ECS grant. We're receiving about $637,000 more than anticipated. Our investment earnings are now at 90% of budget, so that's great. And then our state-owned property, this is new since the last meeting, we actually received $35,000 for our state funding for this. We typically only receive about $2,500, so that is a substantial increase that wasn't budgeted for. And then we have our KERMA distribution for about $38,000 that was reported last time as well for our participation in the Members' Equity Distribution Program. And then another highlight, which is fabulous, is we are actually receiving a FEMA reimbursement for the 2011 October storm that we weren't expecting for $119,000. Those funds haven't come in yet, but we have received notification from the state, from the federal government, that we will be receiving those funds. So those were the highlights on the general fund.
Those checks may be delayed, I'm guessing.
I have a feeling.
Maybe a little more stuff.
Quick question, I don't know for you or for Burke, but with the increase in the education cost sharing grant, then are we expecting to have a surplus there that can go into the spend to save account?
I would go to general
The
fund.
non-lapsing or the general fund?
It's really been, it's never been targeted directly. It's a general revenue to the town, so
Okay.
we've not
So, but it gives
earmarked
us
it that
that's a
way.
surplus for us.
Yeah, so at the end of the year, as part of the transfers, you can decide to put in fund balance or use it for something else.
Think of a few things.
Yeah.
Okay, and then,
All right, moving on to Simsbury Farms. So this fund is currently showing a deficit of $424,454. This is probably going to be the height of the deficit for the entire fiscal year, since the rec fund goes through ebbs and flows as far as revenue that comes in during like the pool season, so the end of the summer and then in the spring, along with the golf course revenue. I expect that deficit to decrease. And then also, we had some insurance payments that were made earlier this year than the same time last year, so we don't have those revenues offsetting. So the deficit that is showing here is definitely overstated. However, that's where it is at this point in time. And you can see that the major driver here is just the golf course fees that had the $60,000 decrease from the same period last year. But again, that should go up as golf season starts up again.
Every golf course out there had a deficit this year, because it
Yeah.
was all the rain.
Yeah.
yeah, it was a bad year weather-wise. So just state the obvious, I think what you just said is that even though the deficit expenditures are off by $424,000, the operative number is they're about $40,000 below where we were same time last year?
Correct.
Does that include the $19,000 in lease payment that we're expecting from the restaurant?
So that does not, it includes not having the $19,000, but subsequently, actually yesterday, we received a check for $15,000.
What were they in, was it an age receivable or like for how long?
Couple weeks.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't,
It was due in December.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
All right, and so but this is still a topic that requires study and discussion, and are we going to do this as a separate agenda item at some point, separate from the actual budget discussion, or how did you see if we would proceed?
I can jump in here if you'd like. We are definitely, we are still working on the analysis, and we're also putting together a report that will have both our findings as well as a series of staff recommendations in terms of sort of how to tackle this problem, and I think it's going to be fairly comprehensive, but we're still working on that. But I do think that that's probably something that would be, a specific agenda item, so we can go over the report, the findings, the recommendations, the analysis,
Yeah, I don't think that's something that's
So
gonna be
are-
solved in one budget session.
So are we looking at all the options of external management and, resetting fees or, all of those things?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And Tom has just recently reached out to other communities about.
Doing some benchmarking.
Doing some benchmarking.
So I think we'll be interested in that, and I think it's important enough that it doesn't get lost in the total budget discussion, at least from my perspective. It sticks out. I'm not saying it's not fixable, but it's something that we seem to talk about every year, so it requires that level of attention. All right, good.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was under the capital projects. So there's two capital projects, one for the Hot Meadow Center area sewer repairs for $135,000, and then the Weatog Planning Route 10 and Code Prep for $57,000. There's town policy that if no expenditures have been incurred against a capital project for a period of 2 years, that the funding automatically gets returned to the general fund or subject to reappropriation. So in this case, the project managers would actually like to ask for the reappropriation and have these projects completed by the end of calendar year 2019. On the Hot Meadow Center area sewer repairs, in discussion with Tony at WPCA, he said they've been accumulating this project along with a few other projects that have a total of $500,000, waiting for this specific contractor to come out. In discussions with him, it's at least $10,000 just to have this contractor come out. So when they have him come out, they want him to be able to do multiple projects, which is why this one has been on hold. And then the Weatog Planning Route 10 and Code Prep, in discussions with the Director of Planning, this was just a staffing transition. Chen kind of just got lost in the transition.
Also the solar farm, that's what I know about. They were gonna do it and the solar farm came and things got put off for 1.5 years there.
Just change the town planner? Yeah. So these would otherwise expire and go back into the general fund, but we want to keep them alive through the end of this fiscal year.
Correct.
6 more, 5.5 more months.
Through the calendar year, so the end of.
Calendar? I thought it said calendar or fiscal.
Calendar year, 2019.
Ah.
12 months.
All right. All right, and so then the financial impact, is that on, 6 and 7 relate to that?
It would be 0, right?
Huh?
So there's no financial impact if you reappropriate. If you do not reappropriate, $135,000 is going to go back into the sewer use fund, and then $57,000 is going to go back into the general fund.
That relates to all of these things that we talked, that are in this report, right?
Yes.
Okay. But the only thing we have to act on is the reappropriation of these two
Correct.
projects, all right? So I'd be looking for a motion to approve the reappropriation of the Hot Meadow Center area sewer repairs project in the amount of $135,000 and the Weatog Planning Route 10 and Code Prep project in the amount of $57,000.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor say aye. Aye. All right, capital and CNR policy.
Oh, just one quick, Amy, thank you for doing this. I had asked Amy to do a year-to-date comparison from December to December and the actuals, and that's really helpful, because if you do year to the end of the year, it's kind of hard to tell where we are, but that was so helpful, so thank you for doing that.
I agree, it was great. We could ask for other comparisons and have a spreadsheet as wide as the desk, but
Right.
yeah, that's good. It was helpful.
Okay.
Especially for the mid-year ones, where you're
Right.
trying to figure out where you are relative to where you were last year.
It would be good to see where we were last year, because some of these items, like, oh, we've expended 98% of them, or 0, and it's because it's like when the expenditure falls during the year, and so you're looking and you're thinking it should be.
So she did that, you have
Oh,
an updated
that's here?
one. Yep.
Oh, okay, all right, I didn't see it in my packet.
No, it was in addition to the packet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And before you
Yep.
get to the policy things, I also, this is one of my pet peeves, I know you're working on it, and I really appreciate that, but again, just looking at the capital projects that are listed here, many of them completed, and there's still uncommitted balances in those funds. Yeah, but,
So those will be cleaned up at year end. So, the
so in
ones.
June.
Yes, so when it says completed, we just make sure no other bills come in during the year, and at the end of the year, we'll ask for capital transfer requests, and you can make your decision as to what you want to do with the remainder of those funds.
Okay, because I mean, just eyeballing it, it was about $1 million of
Completions.
yeah. So that's good.
So notwithstanding the change that we're proposing for the capital and CNR policy where we'll have one fund,
Yes.
right? We will still have all of these projects
Yes.
listed and tracked individually. Right. Okay. All right. Moving to the policy, capital and CNR policy. Again, I want to thank Lisa for providing some edits and helping get this to the stage. I think this is like the third time we've looked at this, but I think the cumulative impact of the changes and discussion is getting pretty tight, and I think we're ready to try to approve something here. So if you have questions, please bring them up now.
I have an ongoing concern. I know I've read Lisa's language here. So as I understand it, you're asking us to put an additional $200,000 into the budget for the capital reserve, capital, which, am I saying this correctly?
Yeah, it has.
The capital and non-recurring fund. And so that would
Yeah.
increase the operating budget by $200,000, correct?
It could. It would be presented as part of the operating budget submission. So the generic budget, if you will, with the guidance that you set for the Board of Selectmen and for the Board of Ed, that had about $1.7 million in capital, because we didn't decrease it from the fiscal year 19, 18 million. So anyways, so out of that 1.7 million, you could take the 200,000 from that and just not grant a project, or you could increase it and make it 1.9 million and have your 1.7 million in projects, and then add the $200,000 to the capital reserve. But yes, this policy asks for not only the $200,000 in contingency, but it's the value of all of your maintenance items in addition to the $200,000.
So I have a couple of concerns about the $200,000, and that's sort of historical, because as I understand it, what you're proposing and what Lisa's language would do is that if there's an emergency, this fund could be tapped. You'd have to come to the Board of Finance for approval either before or after. But in the past, if there was an emergency, you would have gone to our normal general reserves and had approval by both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. And so this is leaving the Board of Selectmen out of that loop. And so I'm wondering how the Board of Selectmen feels about that. And secondly, sort of from a historical perspective, and Burke will support me on this, we've kind of been tough on the Board of Ed in the past about not having what were very unhappily called slush funds by someone who shall remain nameless and is no longer on the board, but which really upset the Board of Ed. But we were, not wanting the Board of Ed to have a slush fund because we were making the point that we have reserves. That's what reserves are for. That there's no shame if you have an unexpected emergency expenditure. That's what reserves are for. And when you start having funds, here and there reserved for contingencies that aren't in our general fund, then when Standard & Poor's and Moody's is looking at, well, how much do you have in reserves? They're not looking at those other funds. They're only looking at our general fund. And so you're not getting credit for it. So kind of in fairness to the Board of Ed and with concerns about, not having different pots of money around, and with concerns about the Board of Selectmen, I do have a concern about, with whether we should be going forward with putting together a contingency fund. We have a contingency fund that you can use now.
Well, we have a general fund reserve. We don't have anything for maintenance. But also to your point about when Moody's is looking at fund balance, the state also looks at fund balance. So if you're having that maintenance, say of the 1.3 for public works and the paving of the roads, if you're having that additional 1.3 in your general fund, the state is seeing that, and they're making their decisions
I'm not
based on that.
suggesting the 1.3, it's just the extra 200
Just the
for
200,000?
contingency. I mean, if it's specifically allocated, I get that, but if it's just like it's an emergency fund, to me, that's what reserves are for. We have an emergency fund.
Perfectly fine.
What's the 200 on the total? What's the total amount?
Well, one of the other genesis of this was switching from the 5-year amortization on the CNR. So I'm not necessarily an advocate or, I think this is a healthy discussion, but was to have, a dollar amount set aside if we needed that extra bus, because we're changing the way we had done it, which had been changed to the way we had been doing it because we wanted to change behavior. And so now there's a sort of a backstop. Maybe 200,000 isn't the right amount, but where we need a new truck or we have a place to go.
Wouldn't come out of this fund.
Well, it's a good point, but
So we haven't actually voted to do the switch of the capital CNR, right, to pay that off, because that's an expenditure of about 1.5 million, did you say?
I can look quick.
That we hadn't voted on yet. This would give us the
True.
ability to do it if we wanted to. I'm still hesitant to do that aspect of it with the old, if it ain't broke, don't, why fix it? And also, given that Moody's and some of the Standard & Poor's are looking to get the reserves higher at the 15%, I'm just hesitant to do that. I know what's coming with the governor's budget. It's not good. It can't be good unless he's going to break all sorts of promises. He's already given a heads up that municipalities are going to be hit, and wealthier municipalities are going to be hit. So I expect a reduction there, maybe not more than 300 to 700, but I'm just hesitant to do that before we know what the governor's budget is. In terms of Linda's, I don't have a problem with that. I know when Maria and Rob and I met, I had mentioned to Rob and Maria, there's always 30,000 of stuff that breaks. And we've generally put that in the contractual line item budget, but we've gotten it down so low, I think last year I was there, it was only 10,000. So it was never enough to cover the stuff that broke. And Rob and I had talked about a 30 to 60 contingency without prior approval, but Maria wanted 200. And I said, well, if you're going to go that high, I think it does need an elected board's approval. And that's how sort of we ended up there. But you would also need that if there's no contingency. It would go through the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. I do want to point out, Maria, you weren't here in 2011, but we had real emergencies then. And, Robert's Rules of Order, which I think we used. Do we use Robert's Rules of Order in this board? Some degree? Well,
Yes, yeah.
I think we do. But they do permit an emergency, if there's a true emergency, and this happened in 2011, things had to be made very quickly, and we couldn't get everyone together for a quorum, and we couldn't call in because there were no phones. So Mary at that point brought in Paul Hinault into the Emergency Operations Center, and there were expenditures made, and Paul made sure that the Board of Finance knew, and then it was ratified after the fact. And Robert's Rules of Order does permit it, so it's not like if there's an emergency, you can't make the expenditure. I would highly advise if you do that, however, to check with Rob and ask Rob to call the members of the Board of Finance so that you can ensure ratification. But, Robert's Rules of Order does permit it, so it's not like you're at risk. And it worked very well. I mean, Paul and Mary worked very well on that, and that was a crazy, Linda, you were in that meeting at that time as well. And I think Moira was as well, and it worked very well. So I don't want to give the impression that you're stuck, because we have a system, we've seen it worked, and it worked very effectively. And that, I think, we're very fortunate to be in a town where the boards work very well together. So I don't particularly see a need for it, but I don't object to it either, so.
And has the Board of Selectmen discussed that, and they're comfortable? No.
So we
So
could
it's kind of a
have,
policy decision for them, too.
Well, it's your policy.
but I think what Linda's saying, oftentimes like the Board of Selectmen, when
Would
they're-
approve.
they might say, ooh, no, we're not going to ask the Board of Finance for that, find the savings within your budget. And that's a policy decision, right, where they say, no, Maria, we want you to find savings here, we'd rather make that policy call than go into general reserves, and they've generally had a say in that. Or they may want to look at other savings before they come to the Board of Finance. And that's, so I view it as a policy decision. I mean, this policy is ours, so, I'm not sure. There are two things that could happen. If we decide we want to keep in the 200,000, you could say to the Board of Selectmen, who would have to approve either the transfer or the use, they either have to recommend, right? Or put it in a line item budget. They could put it in contingent upon their prior approval, in which case, why are we doing this at all? So maybe we don't do the 200,000 if they want to continue with the approval process.
There's sort of three ways to go here. One is we don't have a contingency budget, and then we fall back to having to do everything on an ad hoc basis. That doesn't feel completely right to me. Second thing is we could I don't know how to deal with the Board of Selectmen issue. I understand that by our making this policy, we're asking them to cede decision-making authority that is, I presume, in the charter.
But is the charter then granted her the authority?
Is it? Did it?
Because that's really
it's an emergency situation, like, I'm just going to say a boiler completely breaks down on a Saturday when the library is open to the public. It's a Saturday, it's not easy to call meetings. It's something completely unexpected. We have to get a contractor in there. Maybe the repairs cost, $40,000, and that's something completely unforeseen, right? It happens on a weekend, the likelihood of calling together an emergency meeting of this board, on a Saturday would obviously be very difficult. So, I think in an emergency circumstance like that, we have the ability to authorize the work, but then we have to actually fulfill, paying the contractor.
Which is what you wrote in your, this comeback.
And that's Robert.
So maybe
that's Robert.
But that language can be whether the money comes out of a special fund or comes out of a general. I mean, I'm surprised that you don't have the ability to do that now. I mean, for just the example you gave.
She does.
I can authorize the work, but we also then just need the logistics of paying for it. So if it's
right.
how
So
much it is
by
that
Monday,
we pay for it from somewhere. And so, again, our thought as part of the capital reserve is that if you have sort of a reserve built up and you have an unforeseen emergency that pops up, is you can just pull from the capital reserve to pay for the capital.
So would we have this discussion if the threshold was 50,000 instead of 200,000? Would that seem?
To me, I would not, because I think there is a need for a contingent. I mean, there are 30. Every year I was doing a budget, something broke, and it was always 30,000. Year after year after year.
Don't expect it.
Oh yeah, no, something breaks, or the Board of Finance asks for a study, but it's always 20,000, 20 to 30,000, and so, we have. I mean, you can view contingencies. I mean, all our line items are in some way. We don't look into the specifics of what each is spent. Where I get hesitant, where I think this board is hesitant, is this is an expenditure not for a designated use. And when that happens, we do want, our elected boards to have some accountability. So that's why you give it a little extra heightened scrutiny as opposed to other line items. But for a de minimis, 30 to, I mean, Rob, you and I was comfortable with 30, you were comfortable with 60, so I see you're settling on 50. That would also be fine.
Just a round number.
47 and a half.
Yeah, just a round number.
Right. No, but yes.
Do you encounter this issue? I would assume you would. And how is it?
Well, they don't have the same line item restrictions
Yeah. Right.
that the Board of
Right.
Selectmen's
He had-
budget
Just do
has.
it.
He has
They
you have a
kind of
total
can pull
budget
from
that you
here and
can.
there, and-
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
it's a little
I
bit
mean, to
different.
Rob's question, if it's 50, then
Right.
I'll withdraw my concerns.
Well, let's do that,
In the
because
interest
I
of
really would be interested in
expediency.
trying to get this policy actually approved.
Yeah.
So I could do, 50, so we don't need the prior approval then, that would just be pure contingency, she can spend and then report?
Out of capital reserve, I'm not sure I would really feel comfortable spending out of capital reserve without at least reporting back to you or seeking,
Yes, yeah.
seeking that transfer out of the reserve into the actual, place that the expenditure has occurred. I mean, again, the capital reserve really would be just for, major budget fluctuations or in the event of some sort of emergency.
All right, so
it's-
we'll keep the language.
I thought the
Reduce it to
language was
language.
good. I don't
Yeah,
think
I think the language
it
is
doesn't
fine.
really restrict, to me, The no cell tower, no communication, no electrical, that's a problem. We're going to have a hard time communicating, which is in fact exactly what happened to us
It is.
in October of,
I don't know if the
But-
police went and got Paul, but somehow Paul got to the.
Cell phones were working.
so, yeah.
So, and sporadically, but people didn't have power for their cell phones,
Yeah.
so we couldn't reach
I
everyone.
went to the high school and
Yeah.
booted them up.
An
and-
old-fashioned knock on the door.
All right, were there other issues or comments on the form?
We showered at
Linda?
the high school, we lived at the high school, yeah, it was fun.
Was it all
No,
about,
that
this was about
yeah,
it?
That was it.
Kevin, are you all right with
I'm
this?
up- Yep.
So incorporating this language, but reducing it to 200, to 50,000?
To 50,000.
All right, so let me give you this language.
All right, so
Does that make sense?
I would move adoption of this policy with those amendments and ask that Lisa be sure that the final policy conforms to what we just said.
Okay,
So that's fine. She also brought up the issue of removing the 5-year CNR funding, and that she's not comfortable with that, and this policy currently encompasses that. So if you want to approve it without that in it, there's just one line that has to be removed.
Which line is that?
It's under number 5, capital and non-recurring fund policy. And 1, 2, 3, it's the last paragraph. And then the last sentence, funding shall be transferred into the capital non-recurring fund in the fiscal year for which the projects are budgeted/adopted. So if you want to wait and go through budget season to see how eliminating the 5-year payback would play out, then that line would have to be eliminated.
What page are
I'm
you on?
not sure that's the only line that would need to be changed. Wouldn't your definition need to be changed? Because, I think,
No, because the definition doesn't reference the funding.
but it references that projects can't be things like police cars that are bought every
None of that
single year.
changes. It's just whether we spread them out over 5 years or not.
Right.
Where are you on this?
Yeah, where is
policy?
the specific language,
Well,
Amy?
non-recurring is an
number
expenditure
5.
that occurs no more frequently than once in 5 years.
And
If
then
you've
the
got
last
something that
paragraph,
you're buying
the last
every year,
sentence.
that kind of violates that.
Well, technically, you're buying a second
It,
car.
it should violate it whether we spread it over 5 years or we take it all at once.
Right.
And what do you want to knock out, Amy?
So that, the
So you
definition
weren't
doesn't change.
comfortable with
Shouldn't
eliminating the
change.
5-year
It's a-
payback?
Right.
So we just
But
have to
then
eliminate funding
non-recurring,
shall be
if you have to
transferred
be-
into the capital and non-recurring fund in the fiscal year for which the projects are budgeted/adopted.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing that. What?
It's the second to last sentence. I think it's right here.
Okay. Okay. So I'm comfortable with knocking that out for now. And we can adjust it if we,
That's the only thing that needs adjustment.
I think you understand not to do that, so even if we've got the language wrong, we can adjust it.
So I guess if you interpret it, which I can do, that it doesn't have to be both capital and non-recurring, it can be capital or non-recurring. Then that
Sorry, I missed
definition.
that.
No, I was just thinking that the.
That was what was
that the
intended, Linda, that's what
definition-
was intended.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Was that the definition wasn't
Right.
changing. Right.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I wasn't sure it was, that we had been interpreting it correctly all along. I don't know what the original intent was. I may have been that any item in this budget was meant to be a capital item that was non-recurring. But you could read it as that it's a capital item or that it's a non-recurring item.
We had used sometimes
so-
non-recurring, which is why we did some of the studies in there.
So I'm going to backtrack and say, we're making substantive changes. Let's redraft it and not approve it tonight.
Okay.
But
All
you
right.
want to make a decision about whether you want, whether we're
Well,
going to do this
we're going
non-recurring
to,
thing?
we're going to take out the 5-year,
Yes.
You are?
Okay.
And then we're going to
And-
replace the 200,000 with
Right.
50,000.
but let's, so
And the language.
Amy
that I did.
Amy and Maria are still advocates of the 5-year removal. So would you put it on the agenda for next meeting? And we'll all come prepared to discuss we've talked about it 3 times now, but let's have that be an actual action item and the final approval of the redrafted document, all right?
And to the extent possible, if you can do a little simplistic presentation about the impact of that one-time decision
Absolutely.
on the upcoming budget. Because I think that's the key sticking point for Elisa, right?
It's just my
Right.
concern of doing a big expenditure if we're gonna see a big reduction
Right,
in state
exactly.
revenue.
Fair enough.
I'm not against it in concept,
no, I'd
it's
like to
just
do it, but-
timing wise, right?
Yeah.
See, I guess I would be more concerned about behavior going forward.
The what?
The behavior going
Yeah,
forward.
that, I was gonna
That's-
say the same thing, that.
Right, so that's where I'm concerned about them being.
I was moved by the reasons it was done in the first place,
Right.
and I think Burke and a couple of others had.
I know Paul and Peter mentioned that to me as well when I raised it, so.
All right. Still there.
We're trying.
Proposed defined benefit plan investment policy, and here I really want to thank Lisa because I dropped the ball twice on this. But we did get the language, she suggested edits that will fix the policy so that all the authority remains with us, but empowers the committee to make recommendations and to do a few things on our behalf. And
So do we have an updated
Yeah,
from
You should
what-
have, right,
what was in our packet?
Yeah,
yeah.
Ah,
it
okay.
came out today, I'm sorry. That's the apology.
Yeah, and I just want to point out for members of the retirement committee, the intent here is to honor the intent of the charter, which does squarely put it in the hands of the Board of Finance to make this decision, but recognize the expertise and the general great input that they give, and that how much we value it in terms of a recommending body. And it helps, the retirement committee does meet the requirement of the charter that we consult with the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. But it does it publicly and transparently and keeps.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just looking.
I added the charter section, and then I mostly changed the committee to Board of Finance. And then the only thing I wasn't sure, and I think this came from you, Kevin, so make sure I have that right. The Board of Finance will receive and review quarterly reports from the town investment. Did we want quarterly? I can't remember what we said.
Yeah, I think quarterly.
I think that's what you said, but I
Yes.
just wanted to check with you.
Correct, yeah. This is a minor thing, but under investment objectives, I just had a question. It said, the first one, it says to achieve the stated actuarial target of the plans. Is achieve the correct word?
Meet? Do you want?
Target? I don't-
Where are you, Kevin? Sorry.
under
Well, but it's just a
section,
goal. It's, guided by the following goals.
To achieve stated,
So it doesn't say you have to achieve them, but that's kind of your goal, isn't it?
okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with whatever. I mean, to me, it's a target, rather, to achieve something means to accomplish it. But
I don't know how to, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure how to say it.
But I'm not that particular, so.
And I think,
Well, the goal is to achieve.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what the sentence says, the goal is to achieve.
and I know
Okay,
Derek
so-
and Kevin, I think you guys are on the committee, you wanted to coordinate so that they'll be on the same day as our meeting, so that you guys aren't off cycle.
Correct.
Yeah, usually it would fall after our meeting, and then we'd have to wait 3 months to report on something that was
Right.
2 months and 10 days old.
Yeah.
And I think you fixed the dates for us, so they,
Is it? All right. What?
question from the,
Yeah.
Can I just add something? One concern I do have with some of the policy updates is duplication between Board of Finance and the subcommittee essentially receiving the same reports and just a lot of potential duplication occurring. Something that Amy and I have talked about and Burke and I have talked about as well is I think there might be some value in documenting what the expectations are for duties and responsibilities of the retirement plan subcommittee to make sure that they will still actually be adding value as opposed to just being a duplication of effort. And perhaps through some sort of memorandum of understanding between, the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, Board of Ed, we could also talk about membership composition. That was one of my an early question when I first started, when I was trying to understand that group and its role and membership, and came to realize that we don't actually have it documented anywhere, and I think that might be a really
So there's no
helpful-
policy that outlines who's on the subcommittee or what they're supposed to do?
And so I think particularly if we revise this particular policy, pushing some authority and responsibility back to the Board of Finance, I think it would be helpful to probably take a look at what is it that we do want the retirement plan subcommittee to do, and what do we want the members
We still want them to do all the work and make all the recommendations. We just want to take credit for it.
No, that's not entirely, that's not
I
entirely.
mean facetious.
But I do think that would be
know.
helpful to engage in the exercise.
I don't know if they're actually necessarily making any recommendations as opposed to just putting information forward to the committee.
Well, they're listening to the recommendations, I mean, of our financial consultants and asking them to opine on questions of implied
Capital markets
return and, yeah.
I view it sort of like the Personnel Subcommittee. The Personnel Subcommittee receives recommendations, and then those same recommendations are brought to the Board of Selectmen. So it is a duplication of services, but it has a first look with a committee that maybe gives it a little bit more in-depth and devotes a full hour and a half to it. So this is sort of similar model to that. The charter does require that we consult with the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, which is why we have two representatives from each of those. But it doesn't say give that authority to them, and it could have. I mean, there could have been a charter change to do that. In fact, it used to be that way, but the charter was changed to give it to the Board of Finance, and so because there wasn't an actual charter change, I think we need to be careful to respect the will of the voters in making that change, whether it was the right change or not. People decided to make that change and put it with the Board of Finance. I think Paul Hanault was a big,
But I think your recommendation's a good one, that there should be some sort of MOU between the two bodies.
Yeah, I do think that's good.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, but I'd like to work on that.
Well, so is it appropriate to adopt this? I think so. Yeah.
So actually, this was really fun for me because I didn't make the revision, now I get to ask the questions, so I have a couple questions if you don't mind. Just in terms of, like the investment monitoring and reporting, it says like the Board of Finance and the committee will periodically review the performance of the investments and the plans. So this is something that's currently done via FIA. They present to the retirement plan subcommittee. So would you want them to present to the Board of Finance as well?
yes.
Whoa.
No.
Whoa.
I think we
Now
get
we're going
the
to double our cost.
We get the
And
summarized version.
I
from
agree.
the quarterly
I think
report.
that's what's intended,
Yeah,
in my mind.
yeah, I agree.
So you don't want reports? How are you going to make your decision?
We get the
No, we-
reports through the subcommittee.
Right. They
Our
summarize.
representatives
Yeah.
that are on the committee will report to us, and they can bring the reports that they received at the subcommittee and share them with us. But I don't think we need to have the financial
Yeah.
consultants come and present to us.
I think we get the Cliff Notes.
Okay, so then that also applies to when deemed necessary, the investment consultant, which is FIA, will provide other manager candidates for the Board of Finance's consideration. So again, they would typically present to the retirement plan subcommittee, but now with this, they're presenting to the Board of Finance.
They haven't been presenting to us in the past, have they?
Right, but this policy says that they would going forward.
We have delegated the charter puts this on us. We have delegated that authority. That makes me uncomfortable.
To hear those, then you'll have to attend the meetings, because otherwise there is no reason to have the subcommittee.
Right.
Well, that's the same with
To
the.
Maria's point.
No, but we do that with Personnel Subcommittee. They hear the exact same thing the Board of Selectmen does.
I'm not in favor of that. I think, only because I think we have two designated representatives on that committee.
Yes, but they have a minority vote. And the charter puts it in squarely in the control of the Board of Finance.
What does
Right,
the
but
subcommittee have power to do?
Yeah, they have to bring those, whatever recommendations or changes they'd want to make would have to come to us. I mean, we would get a summary of whatever that they would be voting on, and we'd have to vote on it.
Yeah.
Right, there's no
But we
real,
don't need the whole, 2-hour presentation from whatever.
Okay,
right, there's no real power within the committee.
so it would still be a recommendation
What's
coming
that?
to
There's
us.
real no power in the subcommittee.
Correct.
Right, so when they came forward for the recommendation to adjust the assumption, right? That's where we had to bring it forward to the Board of Finance to approve that
Right.
recommendation.
Okay, I can live with that.
Okay.
So maybe the language needs a little bit of tweaking?
Right, okay.
I'm sorry, we don't get to.
No, that's fine. I like having, we fill out the agenda every meeting with the same.
Yeah, but my
same
point
thing.
is, I just think I feel very strongly we need to honor what the charter.
Oh, no one's objecting to the authority and responsibility being right where it is here. But I think that in order for the subcommittee to have any purpose from our perspective, it should be to interact with our consultants and bring us information and report on that, and
So-
have us make the decision.
So when are we gonna meet with our consultants as a board?
I don't know that we.
As a
have-
I think we've delegated that to the subcommittee.
So I am not comfortable with that. I mean, I will, if I do not prevail in that position, I will attend,
And that's
pension
fine.
Well,
committee
the
meetings.
entire, I think, maybe to alleviate the concern, the entire committee would have to come here and give the update, as opposed to just like Kevin and I, for example.
Are they gonna wanna do that?
Well, I don't know, but at least it encompasses more than just
So
Kevin
we
and
went
I
around
from
the
Board
circle
of
again, there would be no purpose to
Right.
have a
Yeah.
subcommittee.
Yeah.
And frankly, I mean, from a purely pragmatic perspective, when we're in the middle of budget season, our meetings drag on for hours as
Yeah.
it is, and for us to think that we're gonna have consultants coming and doing presentations on it, it's just not practical. We'd have to have another meeting.
Have you been to the meetings, Lisa?
Yes,
Okay.
I used to be the representative
Okay.
on the Board of
All right.
Selectmen.
So you know what happens there.
Yes.
Burke?
My suggestion, listening and having served in this group for 10 years prior with the prior model, this was sort of an elegant solution that was created to make sure that there was input from all of the parties. So I think kind of like what happened with the auditor coming and giving you kind of an annual report, and the actuary maybe coming an annual. I think FIA should come on an annual basis, but let the quarterly still happen. And then you have your bigger issue, if there's a big issue of substance, well, yes, you're gonna need them here probably directly. But to sort of quarterly have the input from 2 of your members, and you've got
I'm
3
fine
of
with
us
that.
here who are attending those meetings, and I think that
So
might
they-
be your
so
happy
we-
medium. That would be my suggestion.
Does that help?
It helps.
So I think that's appropriate. So Amy will make that edit. That we'll look
Anybody's
at.
able to go to meetings, so,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're concerned that
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
No, I'm not.
biased,
We have another meeting at 7:30?
7:30.
All right, well, we have 3 minutes then.
we have 6.
And only one more item to cover, so.
Yes. Okay, so we tabled that. The package, next meeting's package will have both of those policies revised for our approval. Fiscal year 27 annual report.
Fine.
Oh, yeah. Nice job.
It is. So I do have one suggestion there for next year. This is technically a Board of Finance report by charter, and so I think, Rob, you should continue. You used to do a letter, and I think you should do a
Oh,
letter.
I want my picture.
I want the whole board of, but
You get a smaller picture.
But I also think the Board of Education, we used to have Matt and Tara, and you might want to do you and Eric, and then the Board of Finance used to do it. I think it is important that the elected officials, because this document reflects policy, budgets reflect our values, and the values and policy are chosen by the elected officials, so I think it's important. And also, many boards contribute to it. In the past, we've listed who they are, and I think it's very respectful to those who are giving of their time and service to the community to have them included in the back, as we always have. So I would just request that in recognition of the tremendous amount of time and volunteer work that so many boards and commissions put in. I think that would be lovely.
That was well done, though.
It was.
Yeah.
Okay? All right?
Goals?
Yeah, so the Board of Selectmen goals and economic development priorities.
Did you have like 5 people that were putting, sticky dots on something to come up with your
Rating system.
rating system?
So we sort of tried to stick markers, and that didn't work so we ended up just doing it through electronic means. But we started with a goal setting session in the fall in September. We met on a Saturday, and it was really brainstorming and trying to get some high level ideas from them in terms of what was important to them for the remainder of their term.
And the them was who?
The 6 Board of Selectmen members. So they focused on a handful of focus areas that are included, as well as economic development they actually focused on separately. Just again, for budgeting purposes, as we're coming into budget development, this was a first for them in terms of this sort of goal setting as a group. It's now driving not only the goals they've established for me, but our organizational priorities, and particularly with resources and budgeting. So just going into budget season, we wanted you to have that information available to understand what policies and areas of focus were most important to them.
Well, I think this is really good that you did this.
Thank you. Thanks.
I would elevate developing a permitting guide for land use, but I don't get to vote, but.
That's already been paid for. They're working on it.
Yeah, but it's only it's only a number 2. It's a low priority, but to the public and the builders, it's a very high priority.
And the other thing, I mean, I know you've talked about the need for another financial thing. I didn't see that as one of their priorities, nor the police officer as one of the priorities. So already you've come in, two things have been said today that aren't on this list. So I'm curious as to how that, I'll be interested to see how your budget aligns with theirs, if there's a request for staffing when it's not on their priorities.
So they focused on financial management. That was an important area for them. And
Systems, though, not individuals.
yeah, and there will be a request for a person.
Yeah, but it's interesting that that was not one of their priorities, however. It was systems. So that'll be interesting to see how, because they don't seem in alignment to what I heard today.
Okay, and then the last is the Farmington Valley Health District request or recommendation.
Yeah, that's it.
Just help me understand where this is in whose budget.
Right, so that shows up. That is our contribution to the Regional Health District that we are a member of. They are, or have underwent a strategic planning process. They are anticipating some structural changes to their organization. I just, again, as part of the budgeting process, we'll be going over that in more detail, but I didn't want anybody to be surprised by it because I did just get some very, very good information about this right around Christmas time, New Year's, and again, just didn't want folks to be surprised when we start talking about that new direction that the health district is taking, and that will be part of the budgeting process because we are expecting an increase. Sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I know it's less than 20,000, but it's proportionally.
Roughly 17,000.
It's a pretty big percentage increase.
It's large. It's about a 10% increase.
Having been a legislator and looking at how these guys operate, boy, there's a lot I would change to make them more efficient and to make restaurants and caterers and such be happier, because there's just a lot of paper burden for everybody.
This is less, though. Remember when they were talking about consolidating the health districts, that would have cost us $1.5 million. So to me, this feels like a bargain.
Compared to the, yes, compared to the
proposals,
state's
right.
proposed consolidation.
Right.
Yes, that is correct.
So no action now, but it will be a topic in the budget. So it ends up in the Board of Selectmen's budget, our contribution?
It's not like a grant to an outside agency. It shows up, we have a specific program budget under health, which is essentially the health district. So they have their own.
It's its own line
item.
All right. And before we adjourn, I just would ask, maybe we could think about, since it's taking 4 meetings to get policies approved, what's the next one up and should we get started on it?
I think the next one up would be the debt policy.
Oh, boy. Okay. It's important, but.
Long overdue.
Yeah.
What is it, from 1930?
Before the crash. It's a lot to ask of you as we go into budget season, but if you want, I'm not going to volunteer to take it through. My track record is horrible, but
I'll take a look.
yeah, maybe we should start with that. And then the last thing with the minute left, so we have our meeting in February. I didn't go back to look, but now we go into budget season, so books and all of that start coming in February.
For you all, it will be March. So I present to the Board of Selectmen on February 25th.
But you're gonna post it online. so
Oh my
we'll be
gosh,
able
of
to-
course, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the budget workshop day is March 2nd, so if you all can attend, you're
All right, so we have a meeting in the middle of February sometime. All right.
We get
You
the
ready?
governor's budget on the 16th?
Huh? The 12th?
That's they pushed it out.
Lady has to listen, I heard on the radio.
What's that?
I heard on public radio that he had extra time this year.
Yeah, he did, that's what I heard too. I think it's the 16th.
Oh, fake news.
All right, motion for adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Yeah, I have something for the 12th.